In the Kyoto hills, a secluded aikido master was about to face his greatest test. A peaceful morning meditation turned deadly serious when a viral street fighter and his camera crew stormed the revered Seagal Dojo. Steven Seagal wasn't your typical retired instructor. For over 6 decades, he was a legendary martial artist and elite special forces trainer, known for neutralizing threats before they even formed. When Rook's crew kicked open the doors and issued a public challenge, they had no idea they were confronting a master whose silence was sharper than most men's strikes. Seagal's calm acceptance set in motion a response so precise it would ripple through the martial arts world. What began as a viral takedown attempt would become a transformation of tradition, truth, and ego. The Mountain Dojo would never be the same after Steven Seagal's final lesson. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The neon lights of Seoul's Hongdae district pulsed through the cafe windows as Rook adjusted his phone's angle for the 5th time. The device perched precariously on a stack of energy drink cans, its camera lens reflecting the harsh LED strips overhead. Behind him, the chaotic din of K-pop and conversation provided the perfect backdrop for what he was about to unleash on the world. "What's up, nation?" Rook's voice cut through the ambient noise, his soul-accented English sharp and practiced. "Your boy Darren Kwan is back, and today we're talking about something that's been eating at me for weeks." He leaned into the frame, his blonde-streaked hair catching the light, diamond studs glinting in both ears. The compression shirt he wore bore his stylized logo, a Rook chess piece shattering through a traditional yin-yang symbol. Behind him, his crew of 3 sat at separate tables, each monitoring different social platforms as the live viewer count climbed past 10,000. "These so-called martial arts masters," Rook continued, air quoting with obvious disdain. "These dinosaurs sitting in their little temples, teaching people to bow and breathe and move like they're underwater. It's all performance art, nation. All ceremony and zero substance." Blaze, his cameraman and oldest friend, gave him a thumbs up from across the cafe. The live chat was exploding. Hearts, fire emojis, and aggressive agreement flooding the screen. This was exactly the reaction they wanted. But here's the thing. Rook stood up, beginning to pace in the small frame. "I'm tired of just talking about it. We've exposed frauds in Busan. We've shown up fake masters in LA, but there's one name that keeps coming up in the comments. One guy everyone says I should respect and never challenge." He paused for dramatic effect, knowing his audience was hanging on every word. The viewer count hit 15,000. "Steven fucking Seagal." The chat exploded. V is hype. Girl was frantically screenshotting the most viral comments. Juno, their quiet analyst, looked up from her laptop with what might have been concern, but Rook was too deep in performance mode to notice. "Yeah, you heard me right. The action movie star turned mystical aikido master hiding out in some mountain dojo in Japan. Everyone acts like he's some untouchable legend, but I see right through it, nation. I see an old man trading on ancient reputation and Hollywood mystique." Rook sat back down, leaning close to the camera with the intensity that had made him famous. "So here's what we're going to do. We're flying to Kyoto. We're finding this legendary Steven Seagal. And we're going to show the world what happens when ancient tradition meets modern reality." The plan was already in motion. Blaze had booked their flights that morning, 4 tickets to Kansai International Airport, departing in 18 hours. V had been studying the dojo's location through satellite imagery and social media geotags. Juno had compiled everything known about Seagal's current whereabouts and training methods. "I'm not going there to hurt an old man," Rook clarified, though his grin suggested otherwise. "I'm going there to expose the truth. To show that when you strip away the ceremony and the mysticism and the Hollywood legend, what you're left with is just another aging performer who's convinced himself his own hype is real." 20,000 viewers now. The comments were a mix of excitement and warnings. People sharing stories about Seagal's past, his law enforcement work, his supposed connections to various intelligence agencies. Others calling Rook insane, begging him to reconsider. But Rook fed on controversy. Every warning, every expression of concern, only fueled his confidence. He'd built his entire brand on doing what others said was impossible, on exposing what others were afraid to challenge. The Seagal Aikido Dojo, he announced, reading from notes Juno had prepared. Nestled in the hills outside Kyoto, where the great master supposedly teaches a handful of disciples the true way of Aikido. No cameras allowed. No outsiders welcomed. Sounds pretty suspicious to me, nation. V held up her phone, showing him the trending hashtags they'd created. Hashtag Seagal Challenge, hashtag Modern versus Ancient, hashtag Rook versus Legend. The Korean fight forums were already buzzing. International MMA blogs were picking up the story. This isn't just about one old master, Rook continued, his voice taking on the philosophical tone he used when he wanted to sound profound. This is about the future of martial arts. About whether we're going to keep pretending that mystical energy and ancient wisdom can compete with modern athleticism and proven technique. He stood again, shadowboxing briefly for the camera. His movements were sharp, explosive, honed by years of underground fighting and intensive cross-training. He wasn't just a performer. He was legitimately skilled, having earned his reputation through genuine victories against traditional martial artists across 3 continents. Steven Seagal represents everything that's holding martial arts back. Rook declared, the worship of age over ability, the elevation of ceremony over effectiveness, the belief that some ancient secret trumps modern science and athletic training. The live stream was approaching 30,000 viewers. News of the challenge was spreading beyond his usual audience, reaching martial arts communities worldwide. Traditional practitioners were outraged. Modern fighters were excited. The controversy was exactly what Rook had hoped for. So here's my formal challenge, he said, looking directly into the camera with the intensity that had made him a viral sensation. Steven Seagal, master of the Seagal Aikido Dojo in Kyoto, Japan. I'm coming for you. Not in anger, not in disrespect, but in the spirit of truth. If your Aikido is real, if your mastery is genuine, then prove it. Step onto the mat with someone from this century and show the world that all those legends about you aren't just Hollywood fiction. He ended the stream with his signature sign-off, a mock bow that managed to be both respectful and deeply sarcastic. The final viewer count, 37,000. Comments were still flooding in hours later. Within 6 hours, the clip had been reposted across every major social media platform. Korean news outlets picked up the story. Japanese martial arts blogs buzzed with speculation. International fight forums debated whether Rook had finally bitten off more than he could chew. But in the quiet hills outside Kyoto, in a small dojo where traditional values still held sway, the challenge had yet to reach its intended target. Steven Seagal was teaching his evening class, focused entirely on the subtle adjustments needed to perfect a simple kata, unaware that across the digital world, his name was trending for the first time in years. The storm was brewing, but the mountain hadn't felt the first raindrops yet. Dawn filtered through the rice paper windows of the Seagal Aikido Dojo, casting geometric shadows across polished wooden floors that had been swept and cleaned before sunrise. The building sat nestled in the Kyoto hills like a secret kept by the forest itself, surrounded by cherry trees that were just beginning to show the first hints of spring blossoms. Inside, 12 students knelt in perfect rows there, breathing synchronized in the morning meditation that began every day's training. At the front of the room, Steven Seagal sat cross-legged on a simple zabuton cushion, his weathered hands resting palm up on his knees, spine straight as a sword despite his 73 years. The years had changed him. The flamboyant ponytail was long gone, replaced by silver hair pulled back in a simple knot. The flashy jewelry and silk shirts had given way to plain black hakama and white gi. But there remained something formidable in his stillness, a presence that filled the room without movement, a gravity that drew attention without demanding it. Breathing is the bridge between body and mind, he said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the silence. In Aikido, we don't breathe to live. We live to breathe properly. 12-year-old Kinta shifted slightly on his cushion, struggling to maintain the meditation posture. His small frame trembled with the effort of keeping still, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool morning air. Seagal noticed immediately, as he noticed everything, but said nothing, allowing the boy to find his own balance. At the front of the student rows, Reina Saito knelt with the composed grace of someone who had transformed discipline into art. At 28, She embodied everything the dojo represented: precise movement, centered calm, and a strength that extended far beyond physical capability. Her black belt, frayed at the edges from daily use, was worn like a reminder rather than an accomplishment. The meditation ended with a single, soft chime. Students rose in unison, bowing to their teacher before separating into practice groups. No words were needed. They had trained together long enough to understand the silent language of disciplined movement. Kinta, Reina called gently as the youngest student struggled with his opening kata. Feel the movement before you make it. Aikido begins in the mind, travels through the breath, and only then reaches the body. The boy nodded seriously, adjusting his stance with the concentrated effort that only children bring to difficult tasks. He had joined the dojo 6 months earlier after being bullied at school, his parents hoping that martial arts might give him confidence. Instead, he had found something deeper, a sense of belonging in a place where strength was measured in patience rather than aggression. In the corner of the dojo, Master Koji Watanabe sat observing, his gnarled hands wrapped around a cup of green tea that steamed in the morning air. Though he rarely practiced anymore, his presence was as much a part of the dojo as the worn wooden posts and faded calligraphy scrolls on the walls. He had been there from the beginning, when Seagal first arrived in Kyoto 15 years ago, seeking refuge from a spotlight that had grown too bright and a reputation that had become more burden than blessing. The concept we're exploring today is Mai, Seagal announced, moving silently between the practice groups. Appropriate distance. Not just physical space, but spiritual distance. The awareness that allows you to be close enough to help, far enough to be safe. He demonstrated with Reina, moving slowly as she attacked with controlled precision. Without apparent effort, he was always exactly where he needed to be, close enough to redirect her energy, far enough to remain untouched. It was like watching water flow around a stone, natural and inevitable. Sensei, Kinta asked hesitantly, how do you know where to be? Seagal smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. I don't know where to be, Kinta. I simply refuse to be where I shouldn't be. There's a difference. The morning progressed with the quiet rhythm that had defined the dojo for over a decade. Advanced students worked on weapons forms, their wooden swords cutting precise arcs through the air. Beginners practiced basic movements, learning to fall properly before they learned to throw. Seagal moved among them all, his touch light but corrective, communicating volumes without words. It was Reina who first noticed her phone buzzing insistently in the corner where she'd left it. The dojo had a strict no devices policy during training, but emergencies sometimes required exceptions. She glanced at Seagal, who nodded permission. With the slightest gesture, her face changed as she read the messages flooding her screen. Social media notifications, text messages from friends, missed calls from her brother in Tokyo, all pointing to the same thing, a viral video challenge that mentioned their dojo specifically. Sensei, she said quietly, approaching him with the phone. There's something you should see. Seagal glanced at the screen, his expression unreadable as he watched 30 seconds of Rook's inflammatory challenge. The other students had stopped practicing, sensing the shift in atmosphere despite not knowing its cause. A young man seeking attention, Seagal said simply, handing the phone back. The mountain does not concern itself with the barking of dogs in the valley. But Koji Watanabe had caught enough of the exchange to understand. He set down his tea with a soft clink that somehow carried more weight than a shout. Pride is the luxury of the young, Seagal-san, but fools with cameras can cause harm beyond their understanding. Reina felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. She had seen what these viral challenges could do: dojos harassed, masters humiliated, students scattered. The peaceful sanctuary they had built together felt suddenly fragile, like a soap bubble trembling in the wind. Should we contact the authorities? She asked. Or at least warn the gate security? Seagal resumed his circuit among the students, his demeanor unchanged. A tree that bends survives the storm. A tree that stands rigid breaks. We will neither run nor fight unless we must. Kinta looked confused, sensing the adult's tension without understanding its source. Reina knelt beside him, her protective instincts flaring. This boy had come to them afraid and was just beginning to find his courage. The thought of that progress being disrupted by some internet provocateur made her hands clench into fists. But Sensei, she pressed, This Rook person has hundreds of thousands of followers. If he comes here, brings cameras, disrupts the training, then we will deal with disruption as we deal with all things, Seagal replied calmly. In the present moment, with appropriate response, maintaining our center regardless of external chaos. The morning training continued, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Students moved through their forms with the same precision, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation now, like the air before a thunderstorm. Reina found herself glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see camera crews approaching through the trees. As the session ended and students began to leave for work and school, Seagal remained in the dojo, sitting again in meditation posture. Reina hesitated at the door, torn between respect for his privacy and concern for what was coming. Sensei, she said finally, whatever happens, we're here. The dojo isn't just you, it's all of us together. He opened his eyes and looked at her with something that might have been gratitude. Reina-san, strength shared is strength multiplied. But remember, a master's greatest victory is the one that no one sees. She left him there in the gathering shadows, surrounded by the ghosts of 10,000 perfect movements, preparing in his own way for a storm that was already crossing. The Pacific carried on digital winds toward their quiet mountain sanctuary. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted down like snow, beautiful and fragile, marking the end of one season and the beginning of another. The afternoon training session was in full swing when the tranquility of the Seagal Aikido dojo shattered like glass. It was 2:47 p.m., and Reina was guiding intermediate students through a complex partner exercise when the front doors exploded open with a crash that made every person in the room freeze mid-motion. Bass-heavy electronic music suddenly flooded the sacred space, clashing violently with the natural acoustics that had been designed for whispered instruction and controlled breathing. A cluster of people barged in, cameras and phones extended. Like weapons, led by a young man whose presence seemed to consume all available attention. Wow, what's up, nation? Rook's voice cut through the space like a chainsaw through silk. Your boy is live from the legendary Seagal dojo, and we are about to see if these ancient methods hold up against real fighting. He strode across, the polished wooden floor in street shoes, deliberately scuffing the surface that students spent hours each week maintaining. His compression gear blazed with sponsorship logos and his own brand, the stylized Rook chess piece now accompanied by Japanese characters that roughly translated to tradition killer. Behind him, his crew spread out with practiced efficiency. Blaze worked a professional camera, capturing wide shots of the stunned students. V bounced between positions with her phone, providing commentary for her own stream while feeding off Rook's energy. Juno hung back slightly, operating audio equipment and a backup camera, her usual enthusiasm notably subdued. Look around, nation. Rook gestured expansively, playing to his live audience. See these people bowing and doing their little dances? This is what people think fighting is. He launched into an exaggerated mockery of a kata, drawing cruel laughter from his crew and scattered emojis from the thousands watching online. Kinta, the youngest student, instinctively stepped behind one of the older practitioners, his face pale with confusion and fear. The loud music, the cameras, the aggressive energy, everything about this invasion contradicted the safe space he had learned to trust. Reina moved forward, placing herself between the intruders and her fellow students. Despite the chaos erupting around her, she maintained the centered composure that years of training had ingrained. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone. "This is a private dojo. We're in the middle of training." Rook grinned at the camera, zooming in on her serious expression. "Hear that, nation? We are interrupting training." He made exaggerated air quotes, rolling his eyes dramatically. Look at this keeper of ancient wisdom, trying to protect her mystical bubble from reality. The live viewer count was climbing rapidly, 15,000, 20,000, 25,000. Comments flooded the screen faster than anyone could read them, a mix of excitement, concern, and bloodthirsty anticipation. "So here's today's challenge," Rook announced, turning back to address his audience directly. "I'm calling out this entire dojo. Send out your best fighter, your toughest master, and let's see if all this bowing and tradition stuff actually works in real combat. From his position near the back of the room, Steven Seagal had not moved. He stood exactly where he'd been when the doors burst open, watching with an expression as unreadable as still water. His students, trained to follow his lead, remained motionless despite their obvious discomfort. "Please," Raina said, her voice firm but respectful. "We don't participate in spectacles. If you're genuinely interested in learning?" Rook interrupted with a laugh that was meant to humiliate. "What am I going to learn? How to punch air and make funny breathing sounds." He threw mock punches toward one of the younger students, who stepped back nervously. "The future is here, lady. These kids are wasting their time with ancient garbage." Juno, operating her camera from the side, found herself focusing on the students' faces rather than Rook's performance. The fear in the young boy's eyes, the controlled anger in the woman's stance, the profound stillness of the older man in the back. It was a story more complex than the simple narrative they'd come to film. "See, nation," Rook continued, "they always hide behind tradition and discipline because they know they'd get destroyed in a real fight. It's all theater, all ceremony, no substance." Master Koji Watanabe, who had been sitting quietly in his corner throughout the intrusion, slowly set down his teacup. The soft clink of ceramic against wood somehow cut through all the electronic noise, drawing attention without demanding it. His weathered face remained impassive, but his eyes had narrowed to sharp points. Rook spotted the elderly man and grinned. "Wider, is that your master? The old guy?" He strutted toward Koji with exaggerated swagger. "No offense, Grandpa, but I don't think you want this smoke. Might break a hip." Several students stepped forward protectively, but Koji raised one hand, stopping them with the smallest gesture. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of 7 decades spent perfecting his craft. "Young man," he said in accented but precise English, "you mistake loudness for strength. In my experience, the noisiest fighters carry the deepest fears." The comment hit its mark. For just a moment, Rook's performance faltered, his grin becoming forced. But he recovered quickly, turning back to his cameras with renewed aggression. "I'll tell you what," he announced, addressing the entire dojo. "I'm feeling generous today. Send out your champion, anyone, and if they can last 3 minutes with me, I'll leave and never come back. If not," he smiled directly at the camera, "well, let's just say this sacred tradition gets exposed for what it really is." It was then that Steven Seagal finally moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with the quiet inevitability of water finding its level. He stepped forward from the shadows at the back of the room, and every camera immediately swung toward him. He was smaller than expected, his movie star presence diminished by age and deliberate simplicity. But there was something about his movement, economical, precise, utterly without waste, that made even Rook's crew stop chattering. "You came here seeking a fight," Seagal said, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow audible throughout the room. "But fighting is the crudest expression of martial arts, like judging poetry by how loudly it's recited." Rook recovered, his bravado, turning to address his audience. "There he is, nation, the legend himself. Steven Seagal, come to defend his ancient ways against modern reality." But Seagal wasn't playing to the cameras. He looked directly at Rook, and in that gaze was something that made the younger man's aggressive energy falter slightly. "You want to understand what we do here?" Seagal asked. "Then return tomorrow. Alone. No cameras, no audience, no performance. Just you and the truth you claim to be seeking." The dojo fell silent except for the still blaring electronic music from V's speaker. Rook looked around, realizing that somehow the narrative had shifted away from his control. His thousands of viewers were watching, waiting for his response. "Tomorrow," he said, trying to regain his momentum. "Why not now? Why not in front of everyone? What are you afraid of?" Seagal's expression didn't change. "I fear nothing that matters. But if you truly wish to test your understanding against ours, it will be done properly. With respect. Without circus." He turned to address Rook's crew. Directly. "Your cameras see only surfaces. Tomorrow, if your friend has genuine courage rather than mere bravado, he will learn what exists beneath the surface." With that, he walked toward the back of the room, pausing only to place a gentle hand on Kenta's shoulder. The boy straightened under the touch, his fear dissolving into calm. Rook found himself in an impossible position. To refuse would look like cowardice. To accept meant giving up the very thing that gave him power, his audience. Telling and preparing. This story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Fine, he said finally, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Tomorrow. But when I prove your old-school mysticism can't handle new-school reality, don't say I didn't give you a chance to back down gracefully. The crew began packing their equipment, the energy deflated from their intrusion. As they headed toward the door, Juno lingered, watching Seagal help his students reset their training space. Something about the scene, the gentle care, the quiet dignity, the complete absence of ego, struck her as profoundly different from everything she'd witnessed in months of filming challenges. Outside, as they walked toward their rental car, Rook's mind was already working on how to spin this encounter for maximum impact. But underneath his strategizing, a small voice whispered questions he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Behind them, the dojo settled back into its natural rhythm, like a pond smoothing after a stone had been thrown into its depths. But Reina noticed that Seagal remained standing long after everyone else had returned to practice, gazing out the window toward the mountains, preparing in his own way for what tomorrow would bring. The storm had arrived, but its true force was yet to be unleashed. The dojo felt different that evening, charged with an undercurrent of tension that even the familiar rituals couldn't entirely dispel. As the last student departed for home, Reina remained behind, methodically sweeping the floors that Rook had scuffed with his street shoes. Each stroke of the broom was precise, meditative, but her mind churned with questions and concerns. "Sensei," she said finally, unable to contain her worry any longer. "This isn't like the others. Rook has millions of followers. If tomorrow goes badly..." Steven Seagal knelt beside the small shrine at the front of the room, lighting incense. With the same careful attention he brought to every action, the sweet smoke rose in delicate spirals, carrying with it the prayers and intentions of countless training sessions. "Reina-san," he said without turning around, "what is your greatest fear about tomorrow?" She paused in her sweeping, considering the question seriously. "That he'll hurt you. That he'll humiliate our teachings. That everything we've built here will be destroyed for entertainment." "And what is your greatest hope?" The question caught her off guard. I hadn't thought about hope. Only about protecting what we have." Seagal turned to face her, his weathered features softened by the warm light of the paper lanterns. "A master once told me, the same wind that extinguishes a candle feeds a fire. Tomorrow's wind will reveal what we truly are." Across the city, in a modern hotel room overlooking Kyoto's neon-lit sprawl, Rook paced between his laptop and the window, his mind racing with preparation and doubt. His crew had spread their equipment across every available surface, editing clips from the day's confrontation while monitoring social media reactions. "The views are insane," V announced, scrolling through analytics on her phone. The teaser clip hit 2 million in 4 hours. #Seagal Challenge is trending in 6 countries. Blaze was busy crafting tomorrow's promotional posts, cycling through dramatic still frames of Seagal's quiet intensity. "This is our biggest audience ever, Rook. Whatever happens tomorrow, we're going to be set for life." But Juno sat apart from the celebration, rewatching footage on her laptop with growing discomfort. The more she studied Seagal's responses, the more she noticed details that had escaped her in the moment. The way he'd positioned himself to protect his students, the careful modulation of his voice to avoid escalating tension, the profound sadness in his eyes when he'd looked at young Kenta's frightened face. "Hey," she said quietly to Rook, who was shadowboxing in the corner. "Did you see how he moved? I mean, really watch it?" Rook paused his routine, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What about it?" There was no wasted motion. No telegraphing. He didn't even shift his weight when you were yelling at him. It was like, she struggled to find words, like he was completely relaxed and completely ready at the same time. "That's the illusion, June," Rook replied, but his tone lacked conviction. "These old masters are experts at looking mystical. It's all about projecting an image." Juno nodded, but her eyes returned to the screen, replaying the moment when Seagal had placed his hand on the young boy's shoulder. The transformation in the child's demeanor had been instantaneous and genuine. not the kind of thing that could be faked for cameras. Meanwhile, in the hills outside the city, Master Koji Watanabe sat with Seagal on the dojo's small wooden deck, sharing tea and the comfortable silence of old friends. The cherry blossoms were more pronounced now, visible even in moonlight as pale ghosts against dark branches. "You didn't have to accept," Koji said finally, his voice carrying decades of concern wrapped in casual observation. "No," Seagal agreed. "I could have ignored him, let him film his mockery, and leave. But that boy, Kenta, he was afraid. And fear in a child is something I cannot ignore." Koji sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Pride and righteousness often wear the same face, old friend. Are you certain you know which one you're serving?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Seagal had spent 15 years building a life away from conflict, away from the cameras and controversies that had defined his earlier existence. The peace he'd found in teaching, in small moments of genuine connection with his students, felt more valuable than any victory he might achieve tomorrow. "I've been remembering," Seagal said quietly, "the last time I fought in public. The newspapers, the critics, the endless analysis of every movement. Win or lose, I became a commodity to be consumed rather than a teacher to be learned from. And yet you agreed to face this young man. Because sometimes running away from a fight is not the same as avoiding one. If I had refused, he would have declared victory anyway. His followers would have harassed our students, our families. The dojo would have become a symbol of cowardice rather than a place of learning." In his hotel room, Rook had finally stopped pacing and now sat cross-legged on the floor, attempting to meditate as his trainers had taught him. But his mind refused to settle, cycling between visualization of tomorrow's confrontation and unexpected flashes of doubt. He'd built his entire identity on exposing the gap between traditional martial arts' mystical claims and modern fighting reality. His victories had been decisive, often embarrassingly one-sided affairs that left ancient masters looking foolish and outdated. But something about Seagal's response today had felt different, not defensive or afraid, but almost sorrowful, as if he understood something Rook didn't. The young fighter's phone buzzed constantly with messages from training partners, fight promoters, and fellow influencers. Most wished him luck. Some warned him about Seagal's reputation. A few shared stories of the actor's alleged real-world encounters with actual violence, incidents far removed from choreographed movie fights. Back at the dojo, Reina had finished her cleaning but found herself unable to leave. She sat in the same spot where she'd knelt during countless meditation sessions, trying to center herself for whatever tomorrow might bring. The space felt charged with history, not just of her own growth and transformation, but of every student who had found healing and strength within these walls. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother in Tokyo. "Saw the video. Be careful. Tomorrow. These internet people don't fight fair." The warning echoed her own concerns. She'd researched Rook extensively after his challenge video went viral, studying his fighting style, his tactics, his psychological approach to breaking down opponents. He was legitimately skilled, genuinely dangerous, and utterly ruthless in pursuit of content. As midnight approached, Seagal remained on the deck, alone now after Koji's departure. The moonlight filtered through cherry blossoms, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow that reminded him of another life. Another time when cameras followed his every move and violence was a performance art. He thought of Kenta's frightened face, of Reina's fierce protectiveness, of the dozen other students who had found something precious in the quiet discipline of traditional training. Whatever happened tomorrow, it would ripple outward far beyond a simple challenge match. In the hotel, Rook finally managed to achieve a few minutes of genuine meditation, his breathing slowing as his mind found a momentary still point. In that silence, unexpected memories surfaced, his own childhood fear, the bullies who had driven him to fighting, the deep insecurity that still lurked beneath his manufactured confidence. The similarity to young Kenta's situation was uncomfortable, unwelcome. Rook had spent years convincing himself that strength meant never showing vulnerability, never backing down, never admitting uncertainty. But in that moment of honest quiet, he wondered what might have happened if someone like Seagal had been available to him at 12 years old. The thought lasted only seconds before his competitive drive reasserted itself. Tomorrow would prove which philosophy was stronger, traditional restraint, or modern aggression. The whole world would be watching, and Rook intended to give them a show they'd never forget. As the clock struck midnight, both men prepared for sleep in their own ways. Seagal with quiet prayer and intention setting. Rook with visualization and tactical planning. Both understanding that tomorrow would change everything, neither fully comprehending how completely their assumptions about strength, mastery, and victory were about to be challenged. The stage was set. The world was watching. And in the space, between tradition and innovation, between age and youth, between silence and spectacle, a lesson was waiting to unfold that neither teacher nor student had entirely anticipated. Dawn broke over the Kyoto hills like a whispered promise, painting the sky in delicate shades of rose and gold. Cherry blossoms drifted lazily through the morning air, settling on the stone path that led to the dojo where Steven Seagal stood. Waiting in the courtyard, he had been there since before sunrise, moving through slow, meditative forms that seemed to blend seamlessly with the natural rhythm of the awakening world. The sound of approaching footsteps disrupted the tranquil morning. Rook emerged from the tree line, his crew trailing behind with equipment barely concealed in backpacks and casual clothing. Despite their agreement about no cameras, the temptation had proven too strong. Hidden body cameras, phones positioned for accidental capture, audio equipment disguised as everyday items. Rook himself looked different from yesterday's brash performance. Gone were the flashy compression gear and aggressive styling. Instead, he wore simple black training clothes, his blonde-streaked hair pulled back in a practical knot. But his eyes carried the same intensity, the same need to prove himself that had driven him across the Pacific. "You came," Seagal observed without surprise, his voice carrying easily across the courtyard despite its quiet tone. "I keep my word," Rook replied, stopping 10 feet away and offering a brief, grudging bow. "Even when I think the whole thing is pointless theater." Behind him, his crew spread out with practiced stealth. Blaze positioned himself behind a stone lantern, his concealed camera capturing wide shots of the confrontation. V crouched near the entrance, her phone recording, while she provided whispered commentary for a live stream with the volume muted. Juno hung back, her usual enthusiasm replaced by obvious discomfort with the deception. "Your friends are welcome to watch," Seagal said calmly. "But this is between you and me. No performance, no audience, just two people exploring the nature of conflict." Rook's confidence flickered momentarily. Somehow, Seagal had detected their hidden cameras without even looking directly at them. "Whatever, let's just get this over with." "First," Seagal said, moving to the center of the courtyard, "we bow. Not to each other, but to the possibility of learning something true. I didn't come here to learn. I came here to expose." Then, "You have already failed before we begin." Seagal's words carried no judgment, only observation. "Bow anyway. Even wolves show respect before they fight." Reluctantly, Rook offered a deeper bow than before. Despite himself, he felt the strange formality affecting his mindset, introducing a gravity to the moment that his usual aggressive entrances never achieved. "One rule," Seagal continued. "No words during our exchange. Words are how the mind lies to itself about what the body knows. Today we speak only through movement." Before Rook could respond, Seagal simply stood waiting, his posture relaxed but somehow completely present. His hands hung loose at his sides, his breathing steady and visible in the cool morning air. To Rook's trained eye, he looked utterly unprepared, no fighting stance, no obvious guard, no visible tension. It was an invitation and a trap simultaneously. Rook circled slowly, his modern training asserting itself as he looked for openings, weaknesses, tells that would reveal Seagal's intentions. But the older man simply turned with him, maintaining the same relaxed presence, like the center of a compass that remains still while the needle spins around it. The attack, when it came, was explosive and precise. Rook launched forward with a straight right hand followed immediately by a low kick, the combination designed to overwhelm traditional defensive patterns with speed and aggression. But Seagal wasn't there. Not evading dramatically, not leaping away, simply occupying a different space than where the attack was aimed. Rook's punches cut through empty air as if Seagal had momentarily become incorporeal. Frustrated, Rook pressed forward with a flurry of combinations, each one delivered with the technical precision that had made him famous. Jabs, crosses, hooks, uppercuts, a barrage that would have overwhelmed most opponents through sheer volume and intensity. Each strike found nothing but air. Seagal moved like water, flowing around Rook's aggression without apparent effort. He didn't block, didn't counter, didn't even seem to be fighting in any conventional sense. He was simply elsewhere whenever violence attempted to find him. From her position near the entrance, Juno watched with growing amazement. Through her viewfinder, she could see what was happening in slow motion, Seagal's subtle weight shifts, the micro-adjustments that kept him perpetually safe while appearing to do nothing at all. Rook's breathing grew labored as frustration compounded with physical exertion. This wasn't how fights were supposed to go. His opponents were meant to engage, to trade strikes, to give him something solid to work against. Instead, he was shadowboxing with a ghost who happened to look like an elderly action star. "Fight me," he shouted, breaking Seagal's rule about silence. "Stop running and fight." But Seagal merely continued his strange dance, occasionally extending one finger to lightly touch Rook's shoulder or wrist as he passed. Not strikes, merely points of contact that demonstrated how easily he could have inflicted damage if he'd chosen to. The hidden cameras captured everything. Rook's growing desperation, his technique beginning to deteriorate as emotion overtook training, the profound calm with which Seagal navigated the storm of violence directed at him. For 15 minutes, this pattern continued. Rook attacking with decreasing precision and increasing frustration, Seagal responding with what seemed like supernatural evasion. No one was hurt. No dramatic throws or counters. Just one man trying desperately to hit another man who seemed to exist slightly outside the normal flow of cause and effect. Finally, exhausted and bewildered, Rook stopped his assault and stood, panting in the center of the courtyard. Sweat dripped from his face despite the cool morning air. His carefully planned strategy dissolved into confused rage. "What the hell is this?" he gasped. "What are you doing?" Seagal, whose breathing remained unchanged, simply waited. His expression showed neither victory nor smugness, only patient attention, as if he were observing a student struggle with a difficult lesson. Behind the stone lantern, Blaze zoomed in on Rook's face, capturing the exact moment when supreme confidence began its transformation into doubt. This wasn't the content they'd come to create, but it was undeniably compelling, in ways none of them had anticipated. The morning sun climbed higher, cherry blossoms continuing their gentle descent around two men standing in silence, one seeking to understand what had just happened, the other waiting for the real lesson to begin. The moment of profound silence, stretched between the two men like a held breath, broken suddenly by V's excited whisper into her concealed microphone. "Nation, are you seeing this? This is absolutely insane. Rook can't even touch this guy." Seagal's head turned sharply toward the sound, his eyes finding each hidden camera with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. The illusion of privacy shattered completely as he pointed directly at Juno, whose face went pale behind her disguised equipment. "This ends now." His words carried a weight that seemed to compress the very air in the courtyard. Not anger, not threat, simply absolute certainty that deception would go no further. Juno's hands trembled as she lowered her camera, shame flooding her features. "I'm sorry, we thought." "You thought to steal what was meant to be shared freely," Seagal said quietly. "Truth becomes lie when captured without permission." Rook spun around, realizing for the first time how thoroughly his crew had betrayed their agreement. "You idiots. I told you no cameras." The views were insane. V protested, still filming. "We're at 50,000 live viewers. This is our biggest. Turn it off." Seagal's voice cut through her excitement like a blade through silk. "All of it. Now." For a moment, the crew hesitated, caught between their loyalty to Rook and their addiction to content creation. The live chat was exploding with comments, donations, reactions. Everything they'd worked for was finally within reach. Juno was the first to move. She reached for her equipment with hands that shook with genuine remorse, powering down cameras and shutting off streams. "I'm sorry," she whispered again. "This was supposed to be different. Honest." One by one, the others followed her lead. Blaze emerged from behind the stone lantern, his professional camera finally lowered. V reluctantly ended her live stream. her phone going dark for the first time in months. The sudden absence of electronic interference seemed to restore the courtyard's natural acoustics. "Better," Seagal said simply. "Now we can begin again." But Rook's humiliation at being unable to land a single strike had transformed into rage at his crew's betrayal. "This is bullshit. You made me look like an amateur in front of 50,000 people." "Your appearance is your own creation," Seagal replied calmly, settling back into his relaxed stance. "But if you wish to continue, we continue properly. With respect. Without audience." The words hit Rook like cold water. Everything about this encounter had shattered his expectations. He was supposed to be exposing an aging fraud, not being made to look foolish by a man who wouldn't even fight back properly. "Fine," he snarled, launching himself forward again. "No more games. Let's see how your mystical dancing handles real violence." This time his attack carried genuine malice. Not the calculated aggression of a professional challenge, but raw fury seeking to inflict pain. His strikes came faster, harder, aimed not just to win but to hurt. And for the first time, Seagal began to move differently. Instead of simply evading, he started redirecting Rook's energy, using the younger man's own force against him. A thrust became a stumble as Seagal guided the punch past its target. A kick was caught and turned into an involuntary spin. Each redirection was gentle but irresistible, like being caught in a current too subtle to resist but too powerful to overcome. Rook found himself thrown, not violently, but with a strange sensation of voluntary falling. He hit the ground and rolled, coming up to his feet with the muscle memory of years of training, only to discover Seagal hadn't moved from his original position. "How?" Rook gasped, genuinely bewildered. Again and again, the pattern repeated. Rook would attack with everything he had: technique, speed, power, rage, only to find himself gently deposited on the ground while Seagal remained unmoved. Not once did the older man strike back. Not once did he use force to accomplish what seemed impossible. From the sidelines, Juno watched with growing fascination. Her camera was off, but her mind was recording every detail of what she was witnessing. This wasn't fighting in any sense she understood. It was something else entirely, a conversation conducted through physical contact, where Seagal seemed to be answering questions Rook didn't even know he was asking. The crew began to understand why Seagal had demanded privacy. This wasn't about victory or defeat, dominance or submission. It was about revelation, and revelation required vulnerability that no audience could be trusted to respect. After the seventh gentle throw, Rook lay on the ground longer than necessary, staring up at the cherry blossoms drifting overhead. His entire worldview was crumbling with each impossible exchange. Everything he thought he knew about fighting, about power, about strength itself, was being quietly dismantled by an old man who wouldn't even hit him back. "This isn't real," he said finally, his voice small and lost. "This can't be real." Seagal knelt beside him, close enough that only Rook could hear his words. "What is real, young man? Your anger? Your need to prove yourself? Your fear that, without victory, you are nothing?" The questions hit deeper than any physical strike could have. Rook's carefully constructed identity, the unbeatable street fighter, the exposer of frauds, the champion of modern combat, lay as scattered as the cherry blossoms around them. "I don't understand," he whispered, and for the first time since childhood, the admission didn't feel like weakness. Seagal stood, offering his hand. "Understanding begins when we stop trying to force the world to match our expectations. Are you ready to learn what you came here to dismiss?" Rook looked at the offered hand, then at his crew watching from the sidelines with expressions ranging from confusion to concern. The live stream was off. The cameras were down. For the first time in years, he was alone with his thoughts, his doubts, his genuine curiosity about what was happening to him. Slowly, he reached up and took Seagal's hand. The morning light had grown stronger, casting sharper shadows across the courtyard as Rook allowed himself to be helped to his feet. The world felt different now, less solid, more fluid, as if his repeated gentle defeats had loosened something fundamental in his understanding of how force and resistance were supposed to work. "Sit," Seagal said simply, gesturing to a smooth stone bench beneath a flowering cherry tree. "Rest. Breathe. Let your mind catch up with what your body is learning." Rook obeyed without protest, his usual argumentative nature stilled by confusion and growing awe. He watched as Seagal moved to the center of the courtyard, beginning a slow, flowing sequence that seemed part dance, part meditation, part invisible combat with unseen opponents. "This is aikido," Seagal said softly, his movements never pausing. "Not the dramatic throws you see in movies. Not the rigid forms practiced in competition. This is the art of joining with energy rather than opposing it." Each gesture flowed into the next with liquid precision. Seagal's arms moved in spirals and circles, his feet describing careful arcs across the stone surface. To untrained eyes, it might have looked like elaborate choreography, but Rook, still feeling the phantom sensations of being redirected and thrown, began to see the practical applications hidden within the beauty. "Watch my center," Seagal continued, placing one hand on his lower abdomen. "Everything moves from here. Not my arms, not my legs. My center moves, and everything else follows. When you attacked me, you attacked my limbs. But my limbs are not where my power lives." Rook leaned forward despite himself, his competitive nature temporarily transformed into genuine curiosity. "But how do you know where I'm going to attack? How do you move so perfectly?" "I don't know where you will attack," Seagal replied, transitioning into a movement that looked like he was avoiding multiple invisible strikes simultaneously. "I simply refuse to be where attack can succeed. Space and timing, these are the only weapons an aikidoka needs." From the edge of the courtyard, Juno found herself completely absorbed in the demonstration. Her camera remained off, but she was seeing more clearly than any lens could have captured. The way Seagal moved seemed to follow laws of physics she didn't understand. Economical, inevitable, like water finding the path of least resistance. "Come," Seagal said to Rook. "Move with me." Not fighting, flowing. Hesitantly, Rook joined him in the center of the courtyard. Seagal positioned him carefully, adjusting his stance with gentle touches. "Breathe from your center. Feel the ground beneath your feet. You are not separate from the earth. You are rooted in it, growing from it like these cherry trees." As they began to move together, Rook felt something shift in his perception. Instead of preparing to attack or defend, he found himself following the subtle current of Seagal's movement, like a leaf carried along by a gentle stream. "Now," Seagal said, "reach for my shoulder." Slowly, Rook extended his hand, and instead of grabbing or striking, found his movement guided into a smooth arc that ended with him turning naturally away from Seagal's center. There was no force involved, no dramatic technique, just the inevitable result of energy meeting experienced redirection. "You see?" Seagal's voice carried quiet satisfaction. "You did not attack me. I did not defend against you. We simply moved together, and harmony emerged from potential conflict." They continued this strange dance for nearly an hour. Rook gradually beginning to understand how his own aggressive energy could be borrowed and redirected rather than met with opposing force. Each exchange taught him something new about balance, timing, the subtle communication that occurred through physical contact. Reina had emerged from the dojo at some point during the lesson, kneeling quietly beside the courtyard with young Kenta, both watching their teacher work his particular magic. The boy's earlier fear had been replaced by fascination as he observed the transformation occurring in their challenger. "Sensei," Rook said finally, using the Japanese term without conscious decision. "This isn't what I expected. This isn't what anyone expects from fighting." "Because it is not fighting," Seagal replied, stepping back and bowing formally. "Fighting implies opposition, conflict, the desire to impose one's will through force. This is blending, harmonizing, finding the path where violence becomes unnecessary." The crew had remained silent throughout the demonstration, each processing what they'd witnessed in their own way. Blaze, who had spent years filming brutal victories and humiliating defeats, found himself wondering why this gentle education felt more powerful than any knockout he'd ever captured. V, usually unable to contain her commentary, had run out of words for what defied easy categorization. But it was Juno who finally spoke. "That's why you didn't want cameras," she said softly. "This can't be performed. It can only be experienced." Seagal nodded approvingly. Wisdom shared becomes wisdom multiplied. But wisdom stolen becomes mere information, empty of the understanding that gives it meaning. Rook looked down at his hands, still feeling the echo of energies he'd never learned to perceive. His entire career had been built on proving that modern training could overcome traditional mysticism. But what he'd experienced here transcended that simple dichotomy entirely. "I don't know what to do with this," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I thought I knew." "Knowledge and understanding are different things," Seagal said gently. "You came here with much knowledge about fighting. But understanding takes time, takes patience, takes the willingness to be a beginner." As the morning moved toward noon, Seagal walked toward the dojo entrance, pausing to look back at the young man who had challenged him so boldly just 24 hours earlier. "Return tomorrow if you wish to continue learning. Come as a student, not as a conqueror. Bring no cameras, no audience, no agenda beyond the desire to understand what you have begun to discover." With that, he disappeared into the shadowed interior of the dojo, leaving Rook standing alone in the courtyard, surrounded by falling cherry blossoms and the ruins of everything he thought he'd known about strength. That night, Rook sat alone, on a bench outside Kiyomizu Temple, the ancient wooden structure illuminated by soft lanterns that cast dancing shadows across its traditional architecture. His crew had returned to the hotel, buzzing with excitement and confusion about what they'd witnessed, but he had needed space to think, space to process the complete upheaval of everything he believed about martial arts, about fighting, about himself. The city spread out below him, a mixture of ancient temples and modern neon that seemed to mirror his own internal confusion. Traditional and contemporary existing side by side, each informing the other in ways he was only beginning to understand. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from followers, training partners, fight promoters, everyone wanting to know what had happened, why the promised livestream had ended so abruptly, whether the challenge had even taken place. But Rook found himself unable to answer any of them. How could he explain what he'd experienced when he barely understood it himself? For the first time in years, he turned his phone completely off. The silence that followed felt profound, almost foreign. Without the constant digital chatter, without the need to perform or promote or prove himself, Rook discovered a stillness he hadn't experienced since childhood. In that quiet space, memories surfaced that he'd spent years suppressing, the fear that had driven him to fighting, the insecurity that had made him need to dominate others, the deep loneliness that no amount of followers or viral fame had ever truly filled. When dawn broke over Kyoto, Rook made his way back to the dojo on foot, walking slowly through the morning mist that clung to the hillsides. He carried nothing, no phone, no cameras, no agenda beyond a growing need to understand what Seagal had shown him. At the gates of the dojo, he stopped and bowed deeply, not as performance, but as genuine respect for the space and what it represented. Then he knelt on the stone path and waited. Reina found him there an hour later when she arrived for morning practice. The cocky challenger from 2 days earlier had been replaced by someone who looked younger somehow, more vulnerable, stripped of the aggressive certainty that had defined his public persona. "He's waiting for you," she called softly into the dojo. Seagal emerged from the shadows, unsurprised to find his former challenger in supplication at his gates. In his hands, he carried a white belt, simple, unadorned, the symbol of beginning rather than achievement. "Stand," he said gently. Rook rose slowly, his eyes meeting Seagal's with none of yesterday's challenge, only quiet hope. "I don't know who I am without the fighting," Rook said honestly. "Without the cameras, without the need to prove something. I've forgotten how to just be." Seagal stepped forward and held out the white belt. "Then begin again. Not as Rook the challenger, not as Darren the performer, simply as a student seeking to understand." Taking the belt felt like shedding skin. All the rank, reputation, and recognition he'd accumulated over years of viral victories, none of it mattered here. He was starting over from 0 and 4. The first time in his adult life, that felt like freedom rather than failure. "What's my name here?" he asked. "What name serves the person you wish to become?" Rook considered this, thinking of the boy he'd been before fear had driven him to prove his worth through dominance. "Darren. Just Darren." "Then welcome, Darren-san. We begin with sitting, with breathing, with learning to be still." As the morning class gathered, Darren knelt beside young Kenta, both wearing white belts, both beginners in their own ways. The boy who had once been frightened by the aggressive stranger now smiled shyly, at his new training partner. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Juno sat staring at hours of footage on her laptop. Dramatic confrontations, impossible techniques, the complete transformation of someone she'd thought she knew. Her finger hovered over the delete button, understanding finally what Seagal had meant about truth becoming lie when stolen without permission. One by one, she deleted every file. The challenge that was supposed to make them famous would remain, unrecorded, existing only in the memories of those who had witnessed it. Some truths, she realized, were too important to be reduced to content. When Blaze and V woke later that morning, they found Juno's equipment packed and a note explaining that she was leaving the crew. She had found something more valuable than viral fame in that quiet courtyard, and she intended to protect it. The note ended with a simple line: "Some victories can only be won by surrendering." In the dojo, Darren learned to fall properly, to breathe from his center, to find strength in stillness rather than aggression. The transformation that had begun with physical techniques was revealing itself to be something much deeper. A complete reconstruction of how he understood power, success, and his own worth. Weeks later, when reporters and fight bloggers tried to track down what had happened to the famous Rook, they found only conflicting stories and deleted footage. The challenger who had promised to expose Steven Seagal's fraud had simply vanished, replaced by a quiet student who swept the dojo floors each morning and helped teach self-defense classes to bullied children. The most powerful victory of Seagal's career would remain invisible to the world, measured not in dramatic highlights, but in one young man's discovery that true strength came not from conquering others, but from conquering the need to conquer at all. In the mountains outside Kyoto, cherry blossoms continued to fall, marking the end of one season and the beginning of another. 3 months had passed since the challenge that never made headlines, and the Seagal Aikido dojo had settled into a new rhythm. Darren knelt beside Kenta during morning meditation, both wearing white belts, but for entirely different reasons. The boy had been promoted to yellow weeks ago, but chose to keep wearing white, saying it reminded him that learning never ended. Darren simply wasn't ready for promotion, not because he lacked skill, but because he was discovering that rank meant nothing compared to understanding. The morning silence was broken by the soft chime that ended meditation. Students rose in unison, bowing before separating into practice groups. Darren had learned to love this ritual, the way it created space between the chaotic outside world and the focused interior work of training. "Darren-san," Reina called softly, "would you help demonstrate today's principle?" He nodded, joining her in the center of the room. Over the months, he had become something of a teaching aid, his former aggression providing perfect examples of how force could be redirected rather than met with opposing force. Students learned by watching him attack with controlled intensity, then experiencing how Seagal or Reina would blend with and redirect that energy. "Today we explore Mushin," Seagal announced to the gathered students. "No mind, the state where thinking stops and appropriate action emerges naturally." As Darren moved to attack, something extraordinary happened. Instead of the careful, controlled strikes he'd been practicing, his body moved with the fluid spontaneity he'd once brought to street fights, but transformed. Reina didn't counter or redirect. She simply wasn't there when his techniques arrived, moving with the same effortless flow Seagal had demonstrated months earlier. The watching students murmured in appreciation. Darren had achieved something remarkable. He was fighting without fighting, moving with genuine intent but complete emptiness of mind. The transformation was visible, profound, undeniable. After class, as students began to leave for work and school, Reina approached Seagal with a newspaper folded to reveal a small article in the international section. "Sensei," she said quietly, "you should see this." The headline read, "Viral Fighter Disappears After Japan Trip." The article speculated about Rook's sudden absence from social media, his crew's disbanding, the mysterious deletion of what had been promoted as his biggest challenge yet. Several quotes from fight promoters expressed frustration at losing their most bankable star to what one called some kind of spiritual crisis. Seagal read without expression, then folded the paper and handed it back. "Fame is a hungry ghost. It devours everything but remains forever empty. Better that he disappeared than be consumed." That afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. A young reporter from a martial arts magazine had somehow tracked down the dojo's location, hoping to investigate the rumors surrounding Rook's disappearance. She found Darren sweeping the entrance path, his movements meditative and precise. "Excuse me," she said in careful English. "I'm looking for information about a fighter called Rook. There are stories that he challenged Steven Seagal and then vanished." Darren paused in his sweeping, considering her question. "Rook was lost," he said finally. "I hope he found what he was looking for." The reporter persisted, sensing a story. "Were you here when it happened? Did you see the fight?" "There was no fight," Darren replied, returning to his sweeping. "Only learning. Some lessons are too important to be made into entertainment." Frustrated by his evasiveness, the reporter tried a different approach. "But surely someone must have video? In this age of social media, nothing disappears completely." Darren smiled, remembering Juno's quiet heroism in deleting their footage. Some victories can only be won by surrendering. Some truths can only be preserved by not sharing them. The reporter left empty-handed, but her investigation had unexpected consequences. Within days, requests began arriving from other dojos, from traditional martial arts schools across Japan and internationally. Word had somehow spread, not through viral videos or sensational headlines, but through the quiet networks of serious practitioners, that something significant had occurred at the Seagal dojo. Master Koji Watanabe brought the first formal invitation from a group of Okinawan karate masters requesting a joint seminar on traditional values in modern times. Others followed. A jiu-jitsu school interested in exploring the relationship between ancient principles and contemporary application. A kendo dojo seeking to understand how spiritual development enhanced physical technique. "They want to learn from what happened here," Reina explained to Seagal as they reviewed the growing stack of requests. "Not the techniques, but the transformation. How someone consumed by the need to dominate became someone dedicated to understanding." Seagal considered the invitations thoughtfully. For 15 years, he had avoided the spotlight, seeking only to teach his small group of dedicated students. But Darren's journey had demonstrated something important, that ancient wisdom could still reach modern hearts, that tradition and innovation could enhance rather than oppose each other. "Perhaps," he said finally, "it is time to share what we have learned, not through performance or demonstration, but through genuine exchange. Wisdom shared becomes wisdom multiplied." The first seminar took place on a crisp autumn morning, with representatives from 6 traditional schools gathering in the dojo courtyard. Darren assisted in preparing tea, setting up seating areas, helping create an atmosphere conducive to learning rather than competition. When the masters arrived, they were surprised to find that the famous challenger who had supposedly humiliated their arts was quietly serving tea and adjusting cushions. The reversal of expectations. The former destroyer, now dedicated to service, spoke more powerfully than any formal presentation could have. "This is Darren," Seagal introduced him simply. "He came here seeking to expose weakness and instead discovered strength. His journey illuminates the path we all must walk from ego to understanding." As the day progressed, Darren found himself sharing his story, not as the viral sensation Rook, but as a young man who had confused dominance with strength, performance with authenticity, external validation with internal worth. His honesty about his own misconceptions helped bridge the gap between traditional masters and contemporary concerns. The seminar concluded with a group meditation, representatives from different arts sitting together in shared silence. In that quiet space, artificial boundaries dissolved. Karate, aikido, jiu-jitsu, kendo all revealed themselves as different expressions of the same fundamental search for harmony between inner development and outer action. As the visiting masters prepared to leave, several approached Darren personally. One elderly karate sensei bowed deeply, saying, "Your surrender teaches more than any victory could have. Thank you for showing us that transformation is always possible." That evening, as Darren helped clean the dojo after the successful seminar, he reflected on how completely his life had changed. The aggressive young man who had stormed into this space seeking to destroy tradition had been replaced by someone who found deep satisfaction in preserving and sharing it. "Sensei," he said to Seagal as they worked together, "I understand now why you demanded no cameras. What happened to me? It couldn't have been captured." It could only be lived. Seagal nodded approvingly. Truth is not content to be consumed. Truth demands transformation. You came here as Rook the performer and chose to become Darren the student. That choice ripples outward in ways that no video ever could. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the courtyard where a challenge had become a conversation, where conflict had transformed into understanding, where the end of one story had become the beginning of another. The Kyoto Martial Arts Festival arrived with the spring cherry blossoms, transforming the ancient city into a celebration of tradition meeting modernity. For 3 days, practitioners from across Japan and beyond gathered to share techniques, philosophies, and the timeless wisdom that connected all genuine martial arts. The Seagal Aikido Dojo had been invited to present a demonstration, not as performers, but as representatives of how ancient principles could guide contemporary transformation. Darren stood at the edge of the festival grounds, watching streams of people flow between demonstration areas, vendor stalls, and competition rings. A year ago, he would have seen this as a target-rich environment, dozens of traditional masters to challenge, countless opportunities for viral content. Now, he saw it as a celebration of human dedication to growth, each practitioner walking their own path toward understanding. Nervous? Reina asked, joining him at the observation point overlooking the main demonstration area. Grateful, Darren replied honestly. A year ago, I thought I understood what strength looked like. I thought it was about proving superiority, dominating opponents, collecting victories like trophies. But watching all these people dedicated to learning, real strength is the courage to remain a student. The Seagal Dojo's demonstration was scheduled for the afternoon, in the festival's main amphitheater. Unlike the flashy performances surrounding it, elaborate kata, competitive matches, dramatic breaking demonstrations, their presentation would focus on the invisible transformation that made all external technique meaningful. As the appointed time approached, Darren found himself surprisingly calm. The anxiety that had once driven him to aggressive performance had been replaced by centered presence. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone, least of all himself. The amphitheater filled quickly, word having spread through martial arts networks about the mysterious dojo where a famous challenger had reportedly undergone complete transformation. The audience included traditional masters, modern fighters, curious students, and even a few former followers who had tracked down Rook's new identity. Seagal took the stage with characteristic simplicity, wearing plain black hakama and white gi, carrying no weapons or props. Behind him, his students arranged themselves in a loose semicircle: Reina, Darren, Kinta, and 8 others representing different ages, backgrounds, and levels of experience. "We are here today," Seagal began, his voice carrying easily through the amphitheater without amplification, to demonstrate not techniques, but transformation. Not what we can do, but who we can become through dedicated practice. Instead of launching into impressive throws or dramatic exercises, the demonstration began with simple sitting meditation. 12 people breathing together in shared silence. While hundreds watched, the auditorium gradually quieted as the profound stillness on stage influenced the entire space. Martial arts begin and end with the cultivation of character. Seagal continued as the meditation concluded. External technique without internal development is mere violence. Internal development without external expression is mere philosophy. The art lies in their integration. What followed was unlike any martial arts demonstration most attendees had ever witnessed. Instead of flashy techniques, they showed the invisible foundation that made technique possible: breathing, centering, the subtle awareness that allowed appropriate response to arise naturally from any situation. Darren participated not as a former challenger seeking redemption, but as a genuine student sharing what he had learned. When Seagal called on him to demonstrate the principle of blending with force rather than opposing it, he moved with the same fluid spontaneity that had emerged during morning practice months earlier. The audience watched as Darren attacked with controlled intensity, real aggression channeled through disciplined technique, only to find himself gently redirected. His energy borrowed and returned in ways that left him unharmed but clearly outmatched. But more importantly, they saw his response to being outmatched. Not frustration or escalation, but curiosity and appreciation for his teacher's skill. This student came to us seeking to expose weakness, Seagal explained as Darren bowed respectfully and returned to his position. Instead, he discovered that true strength lies not in conquering others, but in conquering the need to conquer. His journey from challenger to student illuminates the path we all must walk from ego to understanding. As the demonstration continued, several former internet followers recognized their missing idol. But the aggressive performer they remembered had been replaced by someone who radiated quiet confidence without needing to prove anything. His transformation was visible, undeniable, and more compelling than any viral victory could have been. The presentation concluded not with dramatic finale, but with group meditation, practitioners and audience members alike sharing a moment of collective stillness. In that silence, artificial boundaries dissolved. Traditional and modern, young and old, performer and observer, all revealed themselves as participants in the same fundamental search for meaning through disciplined practice. As applause filled the amphitheater, Darren felt tears on his cheeks, not of sadness or frustration, but of profound gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. The applause wasn't for his performance, but for his transformation, for the proof that change was always possible when ego surrendered to genuine learning. After the demonstration, groups of young people approached Darren, drawn by his story of transformation from viral sensation to dedicated student. Instead of seeking autographs or selfies, they asked real questions. How do you find meaning beyond external validation? What does it feel like to start over completely? Is it possible to change who you are at a fundamental level? I thought happiness came from being better than other people, Darren shared with one group of teenagers. But real happiness comes from being better than who you were yesterday. The only person you need to defeat is the version of yourself that stops learning. Later that evening, as the festival wound down and demonstrators packed their equipment, Darren walked through the quieting grounds with Kinta, both carrying supplies back to their temporary accommodations. The boy had performed beautifully during their demonstration, his natural timidity transformed into centered confidence through months of patient training. Darren-san, Kinta said as they walked, do you miss being famous? Being on the internet? Darren considered the question seriously. I miss the excitement sometimes, he admitted. But I don't miss the anxiety, the constant need to prove myself, the emptiness after each victory. Fame is like sugar. It tastes good but doesn't nourish you. What we do at the dojo, that nourishes the parts of yourself you didn't even know existed. As they reached their lodgings, Darren's phone, which he'd turned back on to coordinate festival logistics, buzzed with notifications. Former crew members, fight promoters, social media managers, all trying to capitalize on his appearance. At the festival, comments ranged from mockery of his spiritual phase to genuine curiosity about his transformation. He read a few, then powered the device off again. Some conversations weren't worth having. Some truths couldn't be explained to people who weren't ready to understand them. The real victory wasn't in any technique he'd mastered or any opponent he'd faced. It was in the quiet satisfaction of sweeping the dojo floors each morning, in the joy of helping nervous beginners find their balance, in the profound peace that came from no longer needing to be anyone other than exactly who he was in each present moment. As spring turned towards summer, word of the festival demonstration continued to spread, not through viral videos or social media buzz, but through the quiet networks of serious practitioners who recognized authentic transformation when they saw it. Requests arrived from schools wanting to learn more about the integration of traditional wisdom and contemporary challenges. The story that had begun with a brash challenge in a soul cafe had evolved into something far more valuable than viral content. It had become a living example of how ancient wisdom could address modern struggles, how tradition and innovation could enhance rather than oppose each other, how the greatest victories were often the ones that no cameras could capture. In the mountains outside Kyoto, cherry blossoms fell and new buds emerged, marking the endless cycle of death and rebirth that governed all things. In the dojo, students continued their patient work of transformation, each day bringing small victories over ego, fear, and the illusion that strength came from dominating others. The challenge that was supposed to expose Steven Seagal's methods had instead revealed their profound effectiveness. But the real lesson wasn't about martial arts techniques. It was about the possibility of fundamental change, the courage required to surrender who you think you are in service of who you might become, and the understanding that true mastery was measured not in victories over others, but in victory over the parts of yourself that prevented genuine growth. The mountain remained unmoved, but everything that had touched it was forever changed. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.